All right, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Closers Clubhouse. Again, we do this normally every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. East Coast. But today we're doing a little special Tuesday supplemental Closers Clubhouse with Dr. Drew Pinsky. Dr. Drew was lucky enough we were lucky enough to have an opening in Dr. Drew's schedule, so we took max advantage of it. So thanks everybody for jumping on. We're going to get right into it. So Dr. Drew, I kind of prepped you a little bit this morning, but this show is really about getting inside the mind of success. What makes successful people tick. We all have kind of that sob story, but no one wants to hear your sob story until your success story. But we do want to kind of hear your sort of pre-success story. So maybe just take us back a little bit to, whether, it can be generational, it can be when you were a little kid, take us back to sort of what was that first sort of spark or wherever you kind of got that drive or that motivation to want to sort of build the business that you've built today.
Right. You mentioned that you orient this towards psychological processes, and you really can't talk about someone's life without talking about their childhood and their family of origin. I mean, that's really when our motivational systems get set. And I had a couple of sort of key experiences early on that I think formed, you'll sort of see how it sort of morphed into what later happened. One, during college, became moderately depressed and started having panic attacks. I was like 19 years old and went down to the student health services at Amherst College. And, then there really were no adolescent healthcare services, right? There wasn't anything geared to adolescents. And the physician that manned the healthcare services for the entire college was just sort of retired, essentially New England, primary care guy right out of a sort of a Norman Rockwell painting. And I went down there and I didn't really know what was going on with me, but I had a feeling it was something psychiatric, but it felt physical. And so he looked at me and he goes, you need to get your act together. Like, we'll take a long walk in the woods or something. Happily, if that would help, I've tried everything. I felt just like completely dismissed by this guy. And as I, sort of learned more what was happening to me and started getting marginally good treatment. I never really got good treatment. I just thought we need some sort of adolescent health care, number one. And two, I don't want other people with mental health conditions to be treated like this ever.
Yeah. How old were you?
19.
Wow.
And at the time, I had actually, when I arrived at Amherst College, I was pre-med, but I was so immature, and I did well, but I just announced, this is not for me. I can't do this. And in fact, I really couldn't at that point in my development. And so when I was 19 having panic attacks, part of the problem was I was drifting and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was, I had a poor self-concept and sort of found my way back to pre-med. And when I found my way back, I was a junior in college, and lo and behold, not only had I have a whole new motivation for it and owned it, but I could do it. Like, my brain development got to the point where I could do it, and I could do it well. And so it was a different experience. I mean, there's a case in point for particularly young male brains. Give them a chance to develop. And then I just didn't look back, and I really got a very good training and ended up going to medical school. And I would every day, I remember park my car on the roof of this parking structure, and we would have gross anatomy lab at the end of the day. And I remember I'd walk into my car every day after a gross lab and just go, oh, I'm so grateful. I'm so happy to be doing this. This is purposeful, and I feel like I'm doing something important. And that feeling became sort of my guiding principle. I ended up doing a general medical residency, and then doing a chief residency, and then teaching general medicine. And when I look back at that time, I just thought what I was doing was so important. And I became a severe workaholic around, my first year in a resident, one of my cardiology colleagues, which I was heading towards cardiology. That's really sort of the direction I was going. But first I was heading towards ortho in medical school. Then, because the orthopedist, back then, if you were a athletic male, they just groomed you for ortho. It was ridiculous. But then once I got going, I sort of was heading towards cardiology. But in my second year residency, a guy showed up and said, there's a psychiatric hospital down the street here. They need somebody to cover nights. And I thought, man, that's interesting. I'll do that. and became fascinated with the medical care of psychiatric patients, ending up taking over the medical services in that psychiatric hospital. And ultimately, because all the medical problems were really down on the drug unit, getting extremely good at detoxing people of drugs and alcohol, and then finally diving into the whole process of treatment and drug addiction treatment world, which is itself a whole story. I'll sort of probably circle back to it.
Well, I think it's important, and you touched on the workaholic piece, and I want maybe we can explore some of that too in a minute, because I think, you know, a lot of this audience are real estate professionals and people in the real estate space, or the, you know, the sales space, and I think that, you know, the workaholic syndrome is very rampant in our space, maybe, you know, and it might not be that we work 80-hour weeks, but I think we have challenges knowing when to shut it off and when to turn it on. And I think that might also, you'll be better to diagnose me than I will, but I think I might share some of that with you as well.
Yeah. And I sort of was set up for it for a couple of reasons. One was, you know, like I said, once I got into it, I was so gratified by it. It was so exciting for me. I thought it was so important that it just became my entire identity and everything I was doing. And just, you know, there's you know, the way we're wired as humans is that we get something out of being of service, having a skill, having a wisdom, and using that to help a person. The Messiah complex that people are stuck in today, where they're going to try to save the world, is unsatisfying, grandiose, frankly delusional, and really doesn't do anything for the person that's trying to make a difference. What nourishes people is sort of one-on-one service. And I was sort of feasting on that. I just had lots of that. I really thought it was the greatest thing. So I never had trouble finding meaning, because I always had meaning. I always felt it was purposeful. But so this feeling of importance, this feeling of identity, then I became highly perfectionistic, and then I became sort of a kind of a demanding teacher. You know, I taught a lot of medicine over the years, and, you know, administered teaching programs, and I was rough because people were rough with me, and I appreciated it. And by the way, we were giving people scalpels and prescription pads. It was a really serious business.
Yeah.
And I took it seriously. But back to childhood, you know, a lot of my identity stuff was shaped by a couple of things. One was at an emotionally abusive mother with herself an unstable identity, and a whole crazy backstory there for her. And a dad that was a physician, and very, very much with my brain. In fact, one of my sons has my brain too. It's easy to identify it. And he came out of the, you know, my family on his side escaped the Ukrainian genocide, and they, you know, and pogroms and Bolsheviks, and it was just disaster, and found their way over here, found a sponsor that made it to Canada, found a sponsor, made it to Hartford, then finally made it to Chicago in time to open a restaurant on the eve of the stock market crash, lost everything. And when he was 8 years old, they didn't have a place to live, and they didn't know where they were going to eat. And that affected him profoundly, and he had to transmit that to me. And he did that by when I was like really 2 or 3 years old. And I drive my children crazy with this. They were giving me grief about it yesterday. He would go, I see you need some new shoes. You need new shoes, all right? Oh, okay. Well, you want shoes? Well, you can get shoes. That's fine. Go get your shoes. But tomorrow I won't be here, because I'll be in the poorhouse. You can come visit me there. You can wave. You can't come in. You can wave me through the window, but I'll be in the poorhouse, and you'll put me there, and that's okay because you need shoes, but I'll be in the poorhouse. And this went on for 15 years.
Why all the extra theatrics though, right? Like, why just tell me you can't buy me the shoes?
Well, because the trauma had to be transmitted, right? It had to be the full traumatic impact. You know, I had to be traumatized. I had to share in his trauma. I couldn't just be a behavior shaping with a boundary. Right. It had to be a traumatic incident, which it was. And so, you know, part of my workaholism was a feeling that, you know, catastrophe is right around the corner.
Yeah.
Now, the other, you know, I mentioned how I went down to the drug unit, and got involved there and started getting good at that and started learning about it, but still really didn't understand how to treat addiction. And the director of the program asked me to be the assistant director, and his pitch was, I just be away 2 weeks at holidays. I need you to cover me on the holidays. And you're down there, and this is interesting. I'll get more involved. And 6 months later, he quit, moved me into the position of director. And suddenly I'm directing a large, multidisciplinary chemical dependency unit in a freestanding psychiatric hospital with the sickest of the sick patients that we continue to treat for 25 years. And really had to pay attention. I really had to get my expertise up, which I did, and that became a major part of my career. At the same time, though, I was doing intensive care medicine. I was teaching medicine. I was teaching psych through pediatrics and adolescent medicine. I was doing a general outpatient practice, and I was doing an inpatient medical practice that I would do, at 5 o'clock in the morning. So every day I was getting up at 5 and struggling to get home by 10. And a day off was an 8-hour day of rounding at nursing homes. So that's sort of the condition I was in for many, many, many years. And it was great because I had this incredible breadth of experience in medicine and psychiatry that literally nobody has today. There's no clinician that has the breadth of experience that I had because of my workaholism. Yeah. So in one respect, I'm really grateful for it. I saw everything. I got experience.
You got like everything. 3 careers crammed into one.
And I had a conscious thought at the time that I'm going to do this as 3 careers simultaneously. And probably I won't be able to do it for too long, but I'll get 3 crammed into these 10 or 15 or 20 years, whatever it is. And because I knew I couldn't keep it going forever. Yeah. Now, alongside of this, in medical school in 1983, I was living next to a radio station that overnight became the dominant radio station in Los Angeles. It was a fly-by-night pirate radio station that all of a sudden was the dominant radio. It was a piece of radio history, and it was a block from my apartment. And some friends of mine started socializing with people at the radio station, and suddenly I got a call from one of my friends who said, "Yeah, the radio station down there. Yeah, we've been hanging out, and they have a show in the middle of the night that they open the phone lines and they talk to young people, but they have to figure out a way to make it a community service show. And they want you to do a segment called Ask a Surgeon. It'll be real funny. You'll use big words." I was like, "Oh my God, what are we talking about? Why?"
Ask a surgeon.
And I was like, okay, well, we'll kind of go up there. I went up there with my gynecology techs and my infectious disease techs. And here it was 1983. I was up to my forehead in AIDS patients. We were just starting to call it AIDS. We didn't have a causative agent yet. We knew how it was transmitted. And here were these thousands of calls coming in late at night from a radio station. They were getting their health care from these disc jockeys, and no one had ever heard of AIDS. And I thought, oh my God, I have to keep coming back and talking about this. There was at the time one Anthony
You just felt like
Fauci,
a social responsibility.
Well, there was social. I thought I was doing community service. Yeah. And Anthony Fauci at the time was my guiding light. And he was telling us young physicians, we have to go out and educate and change behavior because of AIDS. It was the same Anthony Fauci that you know today.
Well, that's what what I find so fascinating about you is, and for the audience here again, is obviously we all know Dr. Drew today, but you were really a pioneer in multimedia use, marketing. I mean, you sat front row seat to a lot of this radio history, a lot of this, and I'm kind of I'm just a big fan of radio. I grew up listening to radio. Yes. I grew up in Chicago listening to AM sports radio all the time. I still listen to a lot of AM radio. Obviously followed Howard Stern, Adam's taking over for Howard, all that stuff. And, obviously now with what you guys are, just dominating the podcast world and all in Dr. Drew Live and all that stuff. If someone does want to tap into some of your shows real quick, what's the best way to tap into your content right now?
Really Drdrew.com. Everything's sort of there. I have a separate, it depends what you're looking for. I mean, right now, because media is so diluted that you kind of have to create content on multiple different kinds of content and multiple different platforms. And so I'm sort of, right now trying to get back on television, but I'm doing daily streams and a podcast with Adam and then a podcast with Tom Segura's people. Probably this audience would like Adam and Drew, or just the stuff over at Adam's podcast, I think.
Well, and we like hearing the multimedia stuff, because we all deal with that same challenge in real estate. You know, what platforms to be on, where should we be putting our stuff out? So I think that's very fascinating for our audience too.
You can't be in one place. I mean, let me just kind of finish the radio story very quickly. So for the next 10 years, I was doing it one night a week in the middle of the night, thinking I was doing community service. I did it for free. And then all of a sudden, literally this 2 weeks after my wife got pregnant with triplets, they decided they want to roll it out 5 days a week. And mind you, I was still working until 10 o'clock at night at that point. And I had to go, all right, I have to adjust my schedule. And Susan, my wife, said, you know, if you're out 5 nights a week, that's not community service anymore. That's a job. You better get paid for it. And that's how I started in radio, was because she made me go in and ask for $50 a show at the time. I still thought it was kind of community service. It was fun. It was different. It was interesting. But that now brings us all the way up to like 1992. It was just sort of this thing I did alongside of practicing, just as almost really community service. I thought it was, but the reason, the parable in the story is that I just keep walking through doors. I just keep looking at things, and things come my way. I just go, all right, let's just try that out, because all right, 5 nights a week, I'll try that. And then some television producer showed up, and I was like, well, what does that mean? I don't know how to make a TV show. Well, come on with us. And the whole while, all I think is, how can I make this good? How can we do this and make it purposeful and have a good impact in some positive way? And so that's it. I go through the door and try to figure out how to make it good. That's true of taking over the drug unit. That's true of moonlighting at the psychiatric hospital. That's true of going up there the very first night on radio. It's true of accepting 5 nights a week. It's true of going into a TV show. And it's a policy I have to this day, which is, let's go explore and let's see if we can turn it into something worthwhile.
And by the way, you just stumbled onto a Closers Club theme, which is say yes. You know, we talk a lot about that in here, is, you know, the magic of saying yes to an opportunity. And, you know,
100%.
I mean, you are the embodiment of that in many respects, just saying yes. You know, they handed you the clipboard. Here you go, kid, you're in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with saying yes, but I think there needs to be kind of a corollary to that, is don't you have a vision or a philosophy as you walk through that door, that yes door.
That is powerful.
Don't just say yes.
That helps me.
Yes.
Yeah, have a roadmap that it fits into, right? Like some sort of master map.
No. I'm not saying a roadmap, because I have no blueprint, no roadmap. I'm saying I'm going in. The room is completely dark. I'm entering into.
Okay.
And I'm trying to see if I can make this a worthwhile, have a good impact on people. Okay. That's always what I'm doing. I'm trying to make it successful.
So it's got to fit into sort of your overall theme of what you're trying to accomplish. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, do good. My thing is to do good, to have a positive impact on people's health and well-being in this country, move the culture in a good direction, whatever. But the wherefore and how, zero idea what I'm doing. It's just a pure improvisation from the outset. And in a way, do you guys know Ryan Holiday?
Yeah,
read his stuff. So I invented. I'm the reason Ryan Holiday is into Stoics. I was giving a talk to a group of editors at college newspapers, and Ryan walked up to me afterwards, and this is, 1997 or something. And he was this really bright, I could tell, kid. And he goes, "What are you reading right now?" And I go, "You really want to know what I'm reading?" And I go, "Well, I'm actually reading this thing called the Enchiridion by a guy named Epictetus." I mean, I'm not sure you're going to like this, but I'm right now reading, Stoic philosophers. And that was the door that Ryan went through that brought him into Stoicism. And so we're still good friends to this day. And I was just talking to him, and what were we talking about? My aging brain. Here it is. Hold on. Oh, it's gone. Yeah, well, I'll get back to it.
Well, inspiring. You were the door that opened up for him.
Yeah, it was something.
The Daily Stoic.
yeah, can't remember now what I wanted to say, but you can bet. I mean, Ryan is obviously full of all kinds of interesting stoicisms, and they're often pertinent to our lives today. But he, I can't remember now. I completely lost it. But
well, that's a big connection you and I have, and I also feel like that's another theme for this show is the Stoic philosophy. And by the way, folks, you can fit all of the volumes of Stoic philosophy into maybe like your glove box, because there's not a lot. Not a lot of it exists to this day. So there's Epictetus is one of them. Marcus Aurelius is another author.
Well, and I know I was going to say now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Ryan has a way of processing all of it and making it digestible. And his latest book is on courage. And I was talking to him about that, and I've never thought of myself as a courageous person. And he said, courage is not about being fearless, because fearlessness is heedlessness. I mean, it doesn't require courage if you're not afraid, but it's about going forward even when you have a certain amount of fear. And when he said that to me, now that I remember this story, I thought, wow, I guess, I'm always very apprehensive when I go through these doors, but I go anyway. And, things and Stoic philosophy can really help you then, amor fati and that kind of thing. And not but just to bear what is necessary, but to love it are aphorisms that help you tolerate these things.
No, I love that. Well, now take us kind of move forward to how. So that was obviously the beginning of the love line, right, as we know it today. But finish that off. How did that evolve?
Well, so that was the story I told you about, showing up on radio in the middle of the night. That was the show.
So Susan, Susan Pinsky, your biggest fan and agent, right? She a de facto agent over the years. She said, "You got to get paid for this." So
that was it. And so she's sort of my, Uber manager, really, is what she is, and producer. So I was doing this thing one night a week, and it was community service as far as I was concerned. And suddenly it's 5 nights a week, because somebody got a rating book and found out that one of every 3 radios in Los Angeles was tuned to this show on Sunday night at 10 o'clock. And so the program director rolled it out across 5 days, and I had to adjust everything. And it suddenly was a job, albeit $50 a show, not much of a job. And it just kind of kept rolling. There's many, many stories from there. I mean, the guy I was hosting with at the time kind of blew up. Ricky Rackman came in. Then the television producer showed up, and actually a manager showed up for me. Kennedy on Fox News.
Sure.
She had the show following ours, and she would hang out every night with us. I want to be left alone to practice medicine, essentially. And that's probably 1994 then. And I asked Kenny, can I trust this guy? She goes, yes, you can trust this guy. And on a handshake, he just said, let me see what I can do for you. And then when the TV guy showed up, he sort of handled that and suggested I do it. And because I didn't know what I was doing. I just was sort of, I was busy. I was practicing medicine. I didn't want to be left alone to do that. And I said, look, we can do this TV show on Friday evening and Friday afternoon and Saturday afternoon. I could carve out those blocks of time. And we would literally do 4 to 6 shows in those blocks. We would just change our clothes, do another one. That was Loveline on MTV. And Adam came along because Ricky Rackman was supposed to be the co-host. And he got in some sort of dispute with the producers, and everyone looked at me like, who do you want to do this show? And I have no idea. But it occurred to me, I thought, the guy that does the Mr. Burcham in the morning show, I bet he could do it. I met him, and he seems like he has the sensibility. They screen tested us, and that was it. That was a Wednesday. On a Saturday, we filmed a pilot. And I remember it seemed to go well. And it was like a 12-hour day, and about 8 hours in, the stage manager, who ended up being our stage manager for, the 6 seasons that followed, walked up to us and said, how many years you guys been working together? And we looked at each other and went, no, we met this morning. we met 6 hours, and that moment always stuck with me, that whenever, cameramen or stage managers now come up and say, hey, that was something, I listen very carefully. because they see a lot of stuff and they kind of can tell when the magic is happening. And that was MTV, and that went on for, for 5 years, 6 seasons or something. And the radio then syndicated on the heels of that, and all of a sudden it was all over the country. And radio became a much bigger part of my life. I started dialing down my inpatient medical practice, but still, for another 10 years, just still wanted to be left alone to practice medicine. And celebrity rehab came around, because at that time I had a reputation for, I was treating a lot of celebrities and treating a lot of really, really sick people in our unit at that point. And we were running a very active drug unit. And again, TV producers came around and said, we want to do this thing. And I was that's impossible. I don't know what you're talking about, but I guess, get out there and pitch something is not a bad idea. And VH1 showed interest, and I freaked out. I thought, oh, this is impossible. You can't do this. So I sort of went into hiding. And
was your hang up that, like, discussing someone's medical problems and kind of that thing, or were you like the Hippocratic Oath, or like what were you?
No, you can't bring cameras in a psychiatric hospital.
Gotcha.
You just can't. I wanted to pull the curtain back. I thought it was ridiculous. And to this day, I think it's ridiculous that we treat psychiatric illnesses any different than an appendicitis or a subdural hematoma. And though, there's plenty of emergency room TV shows, but magically psychiatric stuff is somehow different because it involves the brain.
Yeah.
I feel strongly that's a huge, huge disaster and stigmatizing and problematic. So I am all for pulling the curtain back on this common medical problem that is fatal and killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. So I was very much for that, but I was like, you just can't bring cameras in us. This idea is too crazy. And Bob Forrest, the guy with the hat and the glasses, who you know him from the series, we'd been working together for years. We have a long history together. And he walked in my office and he goes, he had no one had any idea that this show was swirling around. They didn't tell anybody. And he sits in my office and he goes, I am so sick and tired of this celebrity media reporting that our patients are on some sort of a spa vacation or making an excuse for their behavior by getting treatment. They are sick. They are working hard. We need to do a TV show where we show how sick they are and how hard they work and how difficult this is.
Right.
And I looked at him, I go, Bob, a funny thing you would say that. Somebody has approached me to do that. And he goes, we have to do this. And he smacked his hands on his knees and he stormed out of my room. and I thought, all right, if he thinks this is a good thing, I'll.
He was the spark.
Then VH1 was swirling around me like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And I thought, all right, let's go check it out. And still, we had a million problems to actually pull it off. And finally, I had this idea. I thought, I could take my team and I could install them in a residential setting, use the residential facilities licensing and the policies and procedures, and treat people and put cameras there. It's a whole different setup. It's a whole different set of regulations and rules. And that's how we did it. But even then we had problems because the thing, it wasn't licensed, and we were going to film in the treatment room in the facility, but the actual address at the facility wasn't licensed for that kind of care. So we literally had to set up a double wide trailer that you don't see on the show. They actually walk across a parking lot to get to the group room and my treatment room.
Oh, wow.
Because we had to set up a separate address for me to treat them essentially as outpatients, as adjunct to their residential care.
So it was to find the loophole.
Millions of different problems to solve. So
now let me ask you this, back to your mental mindset at this time of your life. Now you're starting to achieve some notoriety, some fame, some success. Was financial security attached to that, or were you still struggling financially at this time? Now that you're starting to be recognized and have some fame, or was that coming along with it, or how were you emotionally and mentally and financially during this time of your life?
In a panic. I had triplets. And I really, when we got pregnant with triplets, the obstetrician was trying to get us to do a selective reduction down to twins.
Oh man.
And and I thought we went, essentially my wife and I went away for the weekend. We went down to that hotel where you and I where we had dinner.
Yeah.
Where we first met you. and we hung out for a weekend and just tried to make it. And we were like, we have to do this. We've been given this charge. And I felt like a poker player who was just pushing all his chips in. It's like, okay, we are all in as parents. And so everything we were doing was investing in these kids in a private school and blah, 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 blah. And so I was in a panic, financially for many, many, many years. Probably didn't sort of break into the clear a bit till like 5 years ago, really, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe.
And that's important for people to understand, because I mean, looking at you, probably everyone thinks, oh, this guy's had it made. He lives in California. He's a celebrity. His life's been great ever since, probably first splashed onto MTV. Right. And and I think that's important for people to understand that, a lot of times celebrity doesn't bring the financial security or,
no. Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, no. Radio, what helped me was radio ended up being a good business. I was on radio at a time when it was a good business, and it is no longer a good business. It's a terrible business now. Yeah. And so that really helped. So that helped me reduce some of the, the crazy workaholism a bit. But what did I hear somebody saying this morning? We all have challenges. Nobody doesn't have challenges.
Right. No, you do a great job. I mean, obviously I see, and you have this certain mannerism about you where people just want to open up and talk to you and feel confident. I mean, I sat there at dinner and, it was like everyone was just opening up to you and telling you all their stuff. And, I'm like, God, he's got like a magic superpower of just people opening up to you, but that's also got to be a tremendous, how do you manage all that? I don't want to say I'm in a similar space, but in the real estate space and certainly in the coaching and sort of helping others space, if you will, you get into a lot of I wouldn't say I'm a psychologist, but I do practice amateur psychology at some level, right? And you're dealing with thousands and thousands of people and personalities and conversations, and in a lot of ways, I'm trying to get inside their heads and get inside their minds and maybe persuade them to do something else or make a major life change and get their real estate license or switch careers or some major change. And and I've mentioned this to my team before. I said in many cases, guys, we're playing with fire when you start dealing with mindset stuff, because we're not, we actually went out and got trained in more mental hygiene techniques just because we are playing with fire, right? And I don't want to mess somebody's head up and not be able to let them build it back together, right? So we went through a bunch of courses and took a bunch of mental hygiene stuff, but I just see you having this natural ability to sort of bring this stuff out of people. Did you always have that?
Look, I am highly trained with decades of experience of this stuff, and I don't understand how people can't talk about important things. I don't like small talk. I like talking about what's important to people, what they're really experiencing. And I have Avogadro's number of cases that I've seen and extensive experience. So there's no anxiety.
But how do you not absorb all that?
Well, because it's like when you're a highly, it's like saying, to a highly trained surgeon, how do you do that? Yeah. It's like we have extensive experience, extensive training. I know exactly the parameters that I can stay within and not get over my skis, hurt somebody, and still help. I know exactly where I belong, and I know exactly what can be done and can't be done. And
so help my crew here out. A bunch of real estate people. We deal with a lot of high pressure negotiations. We get in a lot of emotional situations with our clients and other agents. Give us maybe a small little technique or some sort of tip or trick where we can sort of
two things I would say. I mean, you're in the world of persuasion, which is not the world of mental health. It's the world of motivations and persuasion.
Okay.
Stay focused there. Don't get too far outside of what you're actually doing. Number one. Number two, if people do get upset, I'm sure you've heard this. It's very simple. They need a frame. Brains regulate in the context of other brains. And so you need to hold a frame with that other person and listen with your whole body, not your ears, your entire body, and reflect back to them what you're hearing. And hold the frame, hold the boundaries, and just reflect back. That must be tough. I'm wondering what you're feeling. I need to hear more. I'm sorry, whatever. I'm hearing you, what you're saying. Yep, that's got to be, just keep reflecting back what they're saying. And when listening with the whole body is sort of a kind of a special skill set, because most Americans listen with their ears, they listen to words, but we are communicating way more than words. And it's, again, when people get upset, it's just holding the frame, being present, not really doing much else. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do, but I mean, that's the basic advice is be there, hold the frame, reflect. And you don't even have to reflect with words. You can just reflect with your face. That is actually one of the most powerful ways of helping people feel felt. Show on your face the expression of the feeling that you're absorbing from that other person. That sets a boundary. It doesn't let that feeling overcome you. And it signals to that person that you understand what they're feeling.
How do you wash your hands of all of these, emotional and traumatic experiences, and maybe even, taking it out of the medical space and back to sort of the sales space? We have a deal go bad, or we have a really angry client. Give us something that maybe I can use to not take that frustration and then extend it into my family, or bring it home with me. What are some tools that you've used to sort of leave work at work?
Well, again, when you've had so much experience, you always feel you did the best you could, and so you don't walk away with a lot of unpleasant feelings. Not that it doesn't occasionally happen, and it's the usual advice. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So make sure you're getting proper nutrition, make sure you're getting proper exercise, make sure you're getting adequate sleep, and then spending time with other people who care about you, and talking about how you're feeling if you want. But that is the key, is again, regulating in the context of other brains, but also giving your brain a chance with proper nutrition and sleep and exercise.
Huge. Yeah, almost maybe if you come up with your own little reintegration protocols, maybe, from when you leave work or when you leave a deal or leave a client, and then how you maybe reintegrate coming home, or, maybe there's a little protocol. We talked about this with some other experts a couple of weeks ago. They did a lot of work with combat vets returning from, combat theater, and how they reintegrate them into society and so forth and so on. So I could see that.
What was the advice?
Well, we talked a lot about how a lot of ancient warrior cultures, you'd have to spend a week or two outside of the village. You weren't allowed back in right after a battle. And, he talked a lot about how, especially men, we show up with all our armor on, we're out there killing the dragon all day long, and we got our armor. And then he goes, imagine trying to, be a little child and trying to hug a full grown man dressed in armor. It's not going to feel very cozy. So if you bring your armor home, you got to take the armor off. You got to show vulnerability. You got to, be present with your family and your kids. And, and it was just a lot of that, right? It's like warrior cultures.
So it's not a recipe, right? I really bristle at anybody that thinks they can, give you a series of steps that you memorize and then carry out. Yeah. That's cognition. These are not cognitive processes. They are dynamic, experiential, bodily based experiences, and they do not lend themselves to anybody that gives you the 5 steps to whatever. I'd be very cautious, be very careful. It's about, if it gives you a frame for experiencing how to take off the armor and be vulnerable, okay. But if it's do these 5 things in this order, no. No.
But yeah, I feel you on that. Well, I want to do this. So we, normally at this time of the show, I like to, if you guys have a question or want to get called up, feel free to raise your hand.
I so do.
All right, go ahead. Marissa, go ahead.
So Dr. Drew, I've been dying to say this for many years. Longtime listener, first time caller. You, I have so much respect for you, and I have followed you for many years. Just a very quick question and some guidance. I have an ex-husband that is a very huge narcissistic, controlling SOB over our teenage daughter. And I'm just looking for some resources, how to help support her so that way she's not sucked into that.
So there's a good book, I think it's still in print, called Why Is It Always About You? that talks about how to survive narcissistic relationships in various contexts, including a parent. So I'd recommend that. It is, there again, there's no magic recipe for this. It is recognizing what this is, who he is, and that it's not going to change, and it's not about her, even though as a child you always take responsibility for everything that's happening. I mean, I would, the key to dealing with, this kind of person is having people in your corner. Much like a fighter has a trainer in his corner, your daughter and you need somebody in your corner. And that ends up being, ideally a therapist, because the therapist, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine was saying that most of her days these days is spent dealing with helping people who are in relationships with narcissists. That's mostly what they're doing, which I thought was telling. It's actually why I wrote that book on narcissism, because I was seeing it everywhere. And it's not going to be fun or satisfying. He's not going to change. And it's not going to be, she's going to have to find other more satisfying male role models. And the really important thing is, this is the key thing for her life, is she's going to be attracted to narcissists now. I don't know if your father was a narcissist, Marissa. Can you tell me that? And how you?
No, he wasn't. Quite the opposite.
Was your mom a narcissist?
As I've become older, I realized, yeah, actually she is.
Yeah. So these primary relationships set up the wiring in our brain of attraction, and people don't talk about this enough. This is how you end up back with these patterns, is we are attracted to people and places that were traumatizing to us in childhood. It's how we're wired. And so, if your dad was abandoning and left, you will magically be attracted to abandoning males, or somebody that will oblige you by abandoning you. At the time, when you're attracted, your conscious thinking is, I'm not going to go kind of guy again. Those guys always leave me. This guy's totally, and I can tell you with 100% probability, this guy will leave you, even if it doesn't look like that kind of guy. You have to, we tell you, either get therapy, or one of the things we coach people up on these things is, you can't, because of the trauma in your childhood and the narcissistic parent, which is a traumatizing parent by definition, you have to find attractions that are not lightning bolts, but rather butterflies. And if you have to have lightning bolts, then we got to work on rewiring things, because what causes the lightning bolts have got to change. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah, no. And also, I'm remarried to an amazing person that has, been in her life, and at least we have some positive people. So
great question. Appreciate that.
Dr. Drew, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say I'm a big fan. You and Adam Carolla on Loveline were fantastic, and I listen to you guys all the time. And 10 years ago, I watched, Celebrity Rehab all the time, and I loved seeing Tom Sizemore, Heidi Fleiss, and Dennis Rodman. And I spent a long time in each. I run into Dennis all the time. And I know you made a big impact on his life. Could you talk about how you impacted a lot of these people's lives and the relationships you have with them now?
So let's just talk about those three. Dennis, I've got this great story with Dennis. Dennis is they've all. I'll talk to you about their experiences with me as treating. I ceased to be their treating professional formally, and we okay? And I've become friends with all three of them, especially Dennis. I would say Dennis is. I really have a very, very friendly relationship with Dennis, and and this story is sort of pertinent to that, which is that the very first group that we did with Dennis, and I think Heidi and Tom were in that group too. I don't remember. Yeah, I think that was the group, and it was a really intense group, and everyone was very emotional. A lot of stuff was being divulged, and over to my Dennis Rodman sitting in the end of the circle and was reading and actually kind of mouthing the words as he read. He didn't take the book away from his face. And at the end of the group, I go, Dennis, come on, man. these people they're pouring their hearts out. They're having these experiences that we want you in the group. We want you to be a part of this. And he goes, hey, you and I will have a relationship, which we do now. He was right. He goes, but here's what you got to understand. And he goes, he stood up and he put his hand way up high, like he's like making a ledge. He goes, you got to understand something. Here's God. Then he moved his hand down about an inch and he said, and here's professional athletes. You understand that? And we'll be friends. I thought, all right, Dennis. Okay. All right. Okay. We'll see. Let's see how it goes. I accept. And we did become friends, and we did have a working relationship. And I got to meet his mom, and I did a reunion with him and his mom. It really was a very powerful relationship. Now his alcoholism is terrible, and he's in and out. But he's a lot better. And he hangs out with winners a lot more than he used to. And his daughter's now a phenomenal athlete, and he's sort of, Dennis has some brain challenges in addition to alcoholism. If you remember in the series, I did a SPECT scan on his brain, and he had a lot of stuff going on neurologically. And so he's trying to deal with that. And so it's hard for him to experience things and feel things. But I think he's sure. But Dennis has a big burden. Tom, same thing. Very, very well with us. And he did well. He really did well in treatment. And we're friendly now. I can't tell with Tom how he's doing. I know he at times is very serious about his recovery, but he's got terrible, terrible addiction, really serious. And then Heidi just texted me 2 days ago and told me thank you for changing her life and for taking her addiction seriously. And she's a extremely smart woman who I've been trying to convince for years to go back to school to get a professional degree, because she's bright as hell. And she, in my opinion, got sort of sucked into a cult at a young age with a madam who sort of she became fascinated with this woman when she was a teenager, and that woman was cultish in how she conducted that relationship. Really turned Heidi into the madam she became, and so she has a very sort of difficult kind of thinking about the world as a result of those experiences. But she's better. She's a lot better. They're all better.
Oh, that's powerful stuff. Deborah, you had a question. You've been patiently waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Drew. It's Deborah Danielson. I hope you're feeling better from your COVID.
Thank you. All back.
Awesome. I just wanted to comment. I think you did a very, very good job of explaining how when you communicate with somebody, you need to show that you're listening with the whole body, and that you're playing back on the face and in the body gestures the emotion that person is trying to share with you. I've just noticed that since COVID has been around and all of the stress levels have been phenomenally high across our culture, that people seem to lack empathy, and they seem to be more hateful or angry.
Yeah.
And I try my level best on social media, no matter what's coming out, to be positive and to try to bless people. And I just wonder if you have any words of wisdom or words maybe that are comforting to people that could be shared more.
A profound question, Deborah. Really profound. And it's good to connect with you, I got to say. And let me just say, you're absolutely correct. We've had this narcissistic turn. So back when I was working at the psychiatric hospital, when I first arrived there in 1986, there was a sheet you filled out with all the diagnostic categories. And the so-called Axis 2 category was the personality category. And back then, there was all kinds of things, dependent personality, obsessive compulsive personality, all kinds of different personality inputs in that second axis. By 1988, I noticed that 100% of the personalities were what are called Axis B, Cluster B. They're called Cluster B, which is narcissism, borderline, sociopath. Everybody. And I thought, that's interesting. And the literature bears this out, that we had this massive narcissistic turn. Now, not personally, because I was dealing with calls by the thousands every week of people suffering abuse, I could see in real time how pervasive physical abuse, sexual abuse, and child abandonment had become in our society. It was overwhelming. From probably 1968 to 1998, we were in a pandemic of childhood trauma and destroyed family systems. And I was hearing the results of it all the time. Trauma, 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 trauma. And when I wrote the book on narcissism, I wanted to put a chapter in about, I couldn't find it. I studied history. I tried to find other periods of history where childhood trauma had been this pervasive. It's an unusual thing to have so much childhood sexual abuse, so much childhood physical abuse. That's not a normal thing in the historical sweep of humanity. And the only thing I could come up with was pre-revolutionary France. And I just yesterday talked to the author that helped me write that book. And I asked her, I said, do you remember me preoccupying? We wrote the book in the late 90s, or no, we wrote it in the mid 2000s, I guess. And I said, do you remember me obsessing about the France and the revolution and how the guillotines were going to come out and we were going to see mobs? And she goes, you were adamant about it. The publisher wouldn't let you put the chapter in the book. And now here we are. The mobs are on social media. The guillotine is cancel culture and Twitter. And people are engaged in behaviors that are reprehensible. And we have actually, and so the liability of narcissism, as Deborah, as you say, is a empathic failure, right? So the narcissism of itself isn't a bad thing. It's that people's emotions, when you're a narcissist, emotions don't matter, and empathy fails. And you can hurt other people without really being concerned about it because you don't have empathy. So the big liability of narcissism is we're in the midst of that. And we've moved into this mob action that has has gone to another level that I didn't anticipate, which is almost delusionality. So we've gone from narcissism to histrionic, essentially, which is another cluster B disorder. So I think COVID sort of pushed us into this histrionic state where everybody is hysterical all the time. And by the way, it seems to be kind of a worldwide phenomenon, which is hard for me to understand, but it's particularly bad in this country.
But how do our nervous systems handle staying in that kind of an alert state all the time?
We don't. There's a publication just came out yesterday that showed that depression and anxiety are at 3 times the level of pre-COVID. And there was a report from the Teachers Association this morning that 5 to 15-year-olds are so sick psychiatrically, they don't know how to manage it. There is a massive mental health problem. And I saw that coming too. It's why I tried to get everyone to calm down at the beginning of the pandemic. I knew if we responded with hysteria, it would have profound effects. I just saw it coming, and now it's on us. And so Deborah's question is really profound, which is why are we doing this? I'm sort of trying to explain that as this narcissism with the histrionic tone that now has become mobs. And what mobs do is they gather together and scapegoat. Because narcissists and histrionic patients or people with histrionic qualities disavow their feelings, their own aggression is so severe that they disavow it and they see it out there in the world. They put it on other people. You're aggressive. You're a hateful person. Or they gather together in mobs and act out the aggression collectively. It's called scapegoating. There's actually a famous literary critic named René Girard that described this mechanism years ago. And there's literature on the madness of crowds out there that really all followed the French Revolution. That the madness of crowds was not really something that entered the common lexicon until we saw what happened in France. And then all of a sudden, psychology became very interested in mobs. It's actually a controversial area right now, but trust me, mob action is upon us. And that there's a lot of that kind of philosophy flying around now. So it's Foucault and Saussure and these guys that were completely what's the word I'm looking for when people are found to be wrong? completely eviscerated in France. I heard a French philosopher on a podcast going, we cannot understand in France why America thinks these guys from 70 years ago are somehow worth a guiding, being our guide, a guiding philosophical principle. They've been completely disavowed. They've been completely sidelined, and we've moved on. They have no relevance in today's world as far as the French are concerned. And yet here we've adopted post-structuralism as some sort of guiding principle, which is a sad thing. And I don't, the idea that reality doesn't exist or there's not such a thing as right and wrong, and that is to me corollary or sideline to this biological psychological process that's underway, which is the narcissism and now the histrionic, and the way to deal with it is the way we've been talking about, is to be empathic, to not involve in mob action, to not act out aggression. I think Deborah used the word blessing, and there are words that we need to return to: faith, gratitude, grace. These are really important experiences and words that people need to start to hang on to in some way in circumstances that are challenging with narcissists and histrionic folk, which is most of us, by the way. They're not that we're all kind of guilty of it, but we have an obligation to bring it all under control ourselves and not feel that gratification of acting out with the mob.
Yeah, I've noticed that myself. It feels it's short-term, gratification to blast somebody or say something that you think's a little snarky, but then, you end up regretting it, not loving it, and then, and then ends up backfiring. Ricky, you had your hand up. I want to be sensitive to everybody. Go ahead, ask your question, Dr. Drew.
I'm such a huge fan. 20 years or so listening to you, and I had two quick questions. One, I think you've been shown to be right, and you handled this pandemic very rationally. From the beginning, I was in the same space as you, but I'm not a worrier at all, and I know you are. So I wondered how those two things meshed with you to kind of see this for what it was and go about your day with the safety issues that you could. And then I had another question about what's going on right now between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. I was in a room yesterday with a bunch of medical professionals, and I saw something that was so fascinating. Somebody asked a question questioning the vaccine, and this woman just blew up saying, basically, I am the science. You don't deserve to read the same papers as me. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as me. And I spent 8 years doing this, and there's no way that you could possibly know anything about it, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wondered if you could comment on that type of mindset. And I know she's probably not this bad person, but what does that to someone?
Well, again, you guys are asking good questions that are hard to answer systematically without sitting down and writing.
We got
notes.
A good room.
But what has happened to my profession is just astonishing to me. And the one thing we are trained carefully is never say always or never. And if you're hubristic, or if you are certain, you're almost certain to be wrong. Because for instance, as it pertains to vaccines, I think vaccines are great. I couldn't wait to get it. My family's been vaccinated. I had my wife get a booster yesterday. But when somebody is, 22 and has concerns, that's a legitimate decision that has to be weighed in the context of risks and rewards. And I would not to shame and demean these people is exactly the wrong way to deal with it. It's funny. I was talking to a physician roughly my age, and we were talking about how the younger physicians are responding to this pandemic. We cut our teeth in a pandemic that had a 100% fatality rate. You got it, you died. As a fourth-year medical student, I told people every day they had 6 months to live, and I was never wrong. It was a terrible disease, very different than this. And somehow that experience made us a little more circumspect about what we're dealing with here. And my father was a family practitioner as well, and his voice, he had exquisite judgment, and his voice is in my head sometimes. And I just imagined him. I literally can hear his voice going, wait a minute. They shut down the world for a respiratory virus? What? He goes, we had yellow fever and polio and what? And a what? A respiratory? He would have died again. It would have just been so confusing to him that a respiratory virus shut the world down. And everything we do in medicine, even when it's non-pharmacological intervention, has a risk reward associated with it. We need to navigate that with humility, with deep humility. And this idea that humility has been, completely let go of in the name of this sort of authoritarian attitude you're describing, that's anathema to science. I mean, science is about attacking each other for your opinions and trying to refine it further by having the scrutiny of your peers, not fighting off the scrutiny of your peers for.
And that's it. Science is a methodology. It's not a belief system.
Yeah. That's right.
It's a
practice. Right. Especially clinical science. You can't be sure of anything.
You got to be really asking. Right? The nature of science is to probe and question and postulate and prove your theories right or wrong and keep moving.
And she basically said, I don't have to prove it to you. The science is right. Believe the science. There only is one science. And she said, I don't have to prove it to you. And the person said, well, okay. Well, then you can just go around and vaccinate all of your colleagues.
Yeah, that's
but if you want to put it to the large population, you're going to have to come up with a good strategy to put your message across.
Correct.
That's what was so
Whoever
interesting.
said that is clairvoyant because we learned how to change behavior during the AIDS epidemic. There was a whole discipline that developed. We had to change sexual behaviors. We had to get people to wear condoms. We had to do these things that people didn't want to do and had never done before. And we learned how you do it. You create a narrative about a relatable source. I mean, this is what Loveline was, studying cases. Somebody calls in having an intense experience. I explain it, and we talk about the consequences of their choices. That's how people learn. So a narrative from a relatable source, consequences from the choices of their actions, some explanation, a way of framing it, humor, music, that's it. That's how you change people's behavior. If you make mandates from on high, it hardens their position. It makes them less likely to participate in the health behaviors you want them to participate in.
Yeah, and it'd be one thing too if it was in the context of a whole array of ways you could make yourself healthier, behavioral, like you said, change behavior. How about talk about going out for a jog or a run or, doing Wim Hof breath work or leveraging cold water exposure? Zero discussion of that.
Well, we have a problem where we've got to stop the replication of this virus or we're going to end up with another terrible variant. And talking about that collective responsibility is not happening. It's all about your individual risk, which is legitimate. You need to be able to assess your individual risk, but we need to also talk about our collective responsibility to suppress the replication of the virus. I think that's a powerful thing. And then
I'd be on board
figure out a way to use humor with that and create a narrative around it. Then you ever seen those guys, Chad and JT, the guys that go to city council meetings and pretend they're like surf rats and party boys, and you may not have seen it. They've been on Stern a few times, and they went out and they started handing out masks on Huntington Beach, and they go, hey, free mask, and they just went around, and the people's reactions to just handing over a mask were so illustrative, were so compelling. When people had these extreme reactions, like, you can't get out of here, and why would you be giving a mask? And they're like, well, there's this thing called coronavirus. I don't know if you've heard about it. And watching these extreme emotional reactions proved the point. Like, hey, calm down. Think about things rationally. And I just thought they were some of the best health messaging of the entire pandemic. But anyway, you asked me an earlier, that was the second part of your question. And by the way, there's more to be said about what happened to my profession and how we froze in place. It's all evidence of the fact that most physicians are now employees And that's a terrible, you've seen the terrible consequence of that. They're afraid to do their job and say something that goes contrary, or at least outside of the, clinical pathways mandated by their employers. But anyway, the first part of your question was what now? I've already lost track of that.
Okay. So I've been listening to you probably for over 20 years, and I know that you are a little bit of a worrier.
Oh, yeah.
Adam will bust your balls about this all the time.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that I'm the complete opposite of you, and I thought it was interesting that we took a look at the pandemic at the almost the same way from the beginning, without any hysteria, or just kind of staying focused and looking at things rationally when pretty much everyone around you is going crazy.
Yeah.
How did you mesh those two together?
Part of it was, what I was saying about my dad in my head going, what? It's a respiratory, dude, it's a respiratory virus. But I thought it really required a measured approach. I mean, it was very serious. See, I was fighting the press. It was a very serious issue. There's a very serious pandemic, and the people who are responsible for it, the physicians, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, of course, are taking it very seriously. We need to be calm, listen to them. Panic is going to achieve nothing. And the press was, every day was hearing this drumbeat. I've never heard the words staggering and grim repeated in my entire life. A grim milestone. There are 300 patients with this disease. I kept thinking, what's it going to be when it's 300,000? Is that what? It's not. How do we describe that if 300 is grim? How is it going to? What are we talking about? And I knew the medical system would respond. I knew we would get a vaccine. I knew we would get treatments. I know how the clinical sciences work in this country, and I knew we'd find a way out. But we needed to calm down, be careful in the short term, and let the people who are responsible for treating pandemics tell us what to do. Not the evening news, not CNN, not Fox News. These people have the fact that the New York Times editorial board had an opinion about a drug that they just learned how to pronounce the week before, or an opinion about lockdowns, they have no business having an opinion on these things. They have no business. That should strictly come. That's what was bothering me.
Yeah, someone who's listened to you for years and years, I think that is probably your biggest hot button, is somebody coming between the doctor and patient relationship, right?
Yes, that's what this was.
Nothing should come between that.
Great observation, Brian.
Yep.
Great observation.
That's right.
Well, I want to make sure we get a chance to ask enough questions of Dr. Drew today. So let's keep going around the room. I know I called up a few people. John, Roman, you guys had your hands up. Who's got a question for Dr. Drew?
I've got a question. Dr. Drew, you changed my life. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roman.
Little background. I've been listening to you since I was a little kid. Now I'm a big kid. But I was in the FBI. I was in the behavioral analysis unit for one of my jobs.
Wow.
And so that's my professional side. But listening to you all the time, I was on the 3-hour drive from Santa Clarita to Westwood every day.
Wow.
So I spent a lot of time listening to you and others. I was in a relationship with a borderline, and listening to one of your podcasts with Eris Humor, Dr. Eris, you turned me on to her, and then I went and started getting therapy from her. It was awesome.
Oh, great.
So just being in this borderline relationship was like more terrifying than anything I experienced at the FBI by far.
Yeah.
I felt imprisoned, and so listening to you and listening to your advice really helped me. I'm now a facilitator in a 12-step program, and I think of you all the time when I'm doing that. I became a certified life coach, and I just help men and women in the same situations that I was in to help them not hate their lives anymore.
Amazing.
So with that, and I think about Brandon Stogstill, who was inspired by you too, and I feel like I'd love to just continue on. And my question to you is along with saying thank you, is what advice do you have for me? I feel like a rescuer. I want to help people, and just want to listen to your advice.
So keep your mic open, because I need to ask you some questions. But I'm guessing the facilitation is in a codependency meeting of some type?
I got in for pornography addiction. It's from my church. And so it's alcoholism. Yeah, I identified as codependent, highly codependent, and there's
right.
drugs,
And the sex addiction and the codependency kind of go together, right? And that's kind of a common, love addiction, sex addiction, codependency. Yep. They are, some people think they're the same thing. But they do kind of go together, and that's what set you up, right? That's what set you up for this.
Yes.
And so, and I'm sure you've explored, what happened in your childhood that set you up for that. But here's the thing about being a codependent, and it's like being an alcoholic. You're always going to be a codependent. You know what I mean? I was back to Bob Forrest, the guy with the hat and the glasses. He one day said to me, he goes, there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people that feel what's going on inside them and then reach out, and people that are looking out and then he said you're experiencing yourself inwardly and then outwardly, and there are other people that experience themselves out and then in. And I thought, wow, there's something really profound in that, and it's not in the psychological literature anywhere, but the way I sort of thought about it was, as a codependent, you literally experience yourself through others all the time, while straight alcoholics are thinking about themselves all the time and then what other people can do for them. Yeah. And then they're interested in other people, but they don't go there first. And so you're always going to have that frame. You're always going to be sort of interested in other people, experiencing yourself through other people, excessively prone to boundary violation by other people. But that can be your superpower also, in that if you can figure out a way, and that sounds like what you're doing with all your training and your experience in 12-step, of building proper boundaries and holding those boundaries, you will have a superpower in being able to be attuned to other people. And attunement, and then holding a frame and reflecting back to people, something we talked about earlier, is a profoundly healing, a profoundly powerful way of being of service to other people. And when I was talking about listening with your whole body, I think Deborah even brought that up.
Yeah.
That is not an easy skill to cultivate. Through things as the other person is relating to you. In other words, you might feel pain in part of your body, or a smell, or have a thought, or hear some music. You have to be highly attuned to, is that me? Is that just something spontaneous in me? Or is that something I'm experiencing the other person is putting there? Or is that something the other person is sort of triggering in me? You have to be very, very clear about those boundaries. And if you can hold that frame and be those boundaries, you can have some very important impact on other people. And that is where real meaning comes from in a good life, is being able to this is your superpower. And I will share with you, let me just show you, there's a little technique, I mentioned it earlier, about reflecting what you're experiencing the other person on your face. That there's a guy named Peter Fonagy you might look into. He's got some...
Peter Fonagy.
Fonagy, I think it is. He developed the process called mentalization, and he's got some videos out there and stuff about, he studied there's a whole world of interpersonal neurobiology now. And it turns out that really what's important is not what goes on in one skull, it's what two skulls do together. And there's an exchange that goes on between a baby and a mother that is the building blocks of what I'm talking about here now. And he has broken that down into very specific processes of essentially somebody sitting across from you has an emotional experience. You scrutinize the content of their brain, you offer some soothing affects, and you reflect on your face and appreciation, a second order. So that person has a feeling felt. It's an experiential thing. The other guy to pay attention to is Stephen Porges, Porges, the so-called polyvagal theory, which is a neurobiological explanation for emotional exchange, emotional biological exchanges between humans. And it's all mediated through the vagus nerve at the level of the brainstem. And it's been kind of worked out now. And it's so Fonagy has the sort of real-time mechanisms in space as two people experience it, and Porges has the biology worked out. Also a guy named Alan Shore, if you're interested in this whole space. He's, again, I did an interview. There's some podcasts with me and Porges, the Dr. Drew podcast. And then I did a stream with Shore. You can get that at drdrew.com probably about 4 months ago. These are all really powerful theorists.
You're such a giver. You give so much. I mean, obviously, folks, how awesome is Dr. Drew? Pop your mics on and off if you guys appreciate him as a guest today. I want to save the last 10 minutes or so. And obviously, Dr. Drew, you're no stranger to Clubhouse, right? You do some stuff on here. You actively also solicit some listener call-ins from Clubhouse from time to time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think we will be doing it this afternoon at roughly, I think 3:00.
So if you hit Dr. Drew's picture, you can actually follow him and you can set an alarm for every time he's in Clubhouse. You'll get a notification. And I was in one of your rooms the other day. I don't know if you saw him. You probably didn't, but he had a decent sized group, but it was a very intimate group and he was pulling people up and down, getting questions answered. So if you guys want to keep this going with Dr. Drew, he's super available. Obviously, drdrew.com, and he's got his live show that he does regularly. And then obviously the podcast shows. But I would definitely be keeping an eye on him in Clubhouse and, continue this going. We got time for a few more questions. I want to leave with one last question for the room, but I want to see if anybody else, I know a few more hands are in there. Ben, you had a question?
I do.
Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
All right, Dr. Drew. Hey, Brian, thank you for putting this together.
Yes,
I
sir.
really enjoyed this discussion. And okay, Dr. Drew, I'm an exercise kinesiologist. I've spent my life living with chronic pain. I was club-footed at birth and casted from 6 months to 18 months. And I think, that fed a lot of these segmental instabilities throughout my body. 3 years ago, I developed a technique for myself that not only helped me stabilize my cervical spine tremendously, it ended up making a profound difference on all sorts of other things in my body. It ended lifelong TMJ. It recovered an 85% recovered shoulder to 100% overnight. It did all these different really amazing things physically. Today, I'm teaching these techniques to my clients via Zoom, and the results are really staggering and tremendous. But what we're finding is that there's an emotional response that's happening with people. And now I'm all of a sudden going to get pulled into a study on PTSD and the impact of anxiety relative to these techniques I'm using. And it's funny, I'm super nervous talking to you. That's so funny. I remember back to when I was a kid listening to you, at any rate.
So far, so good.
Okay, so curiously, there's EFT, emotional freedom techniques. There's the TRP or TRE, trauma and tension release exercises. So my exercise, it's called Freeborn Neck Protocol. It focuses on the ligamentum nucha, and this is really the heart of my question. When I say ligamentum nucha, do you have an immediate understanding of what that is?
I have some understanding of what that is. It's right next to the spinal cord.
Right. It attaches at the back of the skull, and it goes all the way to C7. It connects to every cervical vertebra. So curiously, thoughts that you might have relative to the physical construct of the cervical spine relative to the skull, and what this could mean for how the mind works, how the brain functions.
Right, here's how I understand these things. When the body has been a source of misery in childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse, chronic pain, the brain-body connection is disorganized. The body becomes a source of scary material that is disorganized and difficult for the brain to process. It's called somatoform dissociation. There's a book called How Do You Feel by a guy named Bud Craig that documents that a lot of that input coming out of the body is mediated through the lateral spinal thalamic tract, which I think may be right near that ligament, if I'm right. And so the lateral spinal thalamic tract is what inputs to a part of the brain called the insular cortex. The insular cortex is the region that has, much like we have homunculi, sort of maps of our body, like little homunculi in our sensory and motor cortices. Yeah. We have multiple homunculi in the insular cortex that go from rather vague to rather well characterized or well defined regions of our body. This is where feelings are generated. It's the vagus nerve to the midbrain. It's the lateral spinal thalamic tract to the insular cortex. And the insula is what's misfiring in chronic pain. It's firing as distress and misery all the time and can't integrate the information coming through the lateral spinal thalamic tract. And so in the treatment of chronic pain, managing trauma, managing the sort of bodily based experiences, using the socio-emotional exchange is how we rebuild these systems so the insular cortex is able to regulate. That's essentially the way I understand it.
Well, that's really amazing, and I hope this is recorded because I'd like to go.
Yes,
go back
we have it recorded, John.
All right, sweet. Well, yeah, so it is. It's located right at the back of the spine, and from what I'm gathering is that, it must be opening up the vagus nerve. We had one man whose right pupil has been dilated since he was 7 years old, and at 37 years old, after one day of working my protocols, his pupil now functions properly.
It is. Autonomic system is poorly understood. We're just in the infancy of trying to understand. We really don't know what's going on there. Try to stay open, great, but the actuality of the processes may be something far more integrated. I mean, who knows? These parasympathetic plexes over our chest and our abdomen, how the sympathetic system regulates along the spinal cord. Why is it organized the way it is? And why is the parasympathetic organized one way and the sympathetic another? And how is this so conserved throughout all mammals? Why is it the way it is? And what does it tell us about how we feel things? It's not understood. But what is understood is how a brain gets it and then what it needs to do with it and regulate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you started the show by explaining how, back when you first started, there was almost a dislocation between the mind and the body, almost in the medical, accepted medical understanding was that, what happens to your body has no impact on your brain, and what happens to your brain has no impact on your body. And now it couldn't be the exact, farther from the truth, right? It's like they're inseparably connected, right?
Well, and let me tell you a story. That I talked about listening with your whole body, and anybody that's done therapy or done what's called emotionally focused therapy or been a patient as emotionally focused in an emotionally focused therapeutic setting, deep relational therapy has had uncanny experiences where they have felt things, seen things, had experiences they can't explain. Two people together create a third thing, the relationship, and that third thing has uncanny properties to it, which includes communications not just from our brains and our words, our mouth to our ears, but somehow bodies are communicating all kinds of things that we don't fully understand. And let me just tell you a quick story. This is the best illustration I have of this. Is I had a patient I was treating who was severely abused in childhood, and he had lots of personality issues and sex addiction, all kinds of horrible stuff. And he'd come in every day and he'd start telling me these horrible stories. And as I developed this, I started hearing music whenever he walked in the room. I started hearing the opening sequence of Mad Men, that da 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 da. And so every day I'd go home, I'd sit down, I'd hear that drum riff, and I go, there's the music. I have no idea what that means. I don't ever hear that music in my head. I don't know where that's coming from, but it's got to mean something. And then as time went on, I'd hear the music and then feel like I was that shadowy figure falling through the buildings. I had this falling feeling. And I would like, that's interesting. That must have some meaning. I'm not sure what, but that's not mine. That's something that we're creating together, this patient and I. And one day he came in and started telling me these horrible things, these horrible traumas, and then I heard the music and I felt like I was falling. And then all of a sudden, I was not me falling through the building, but a baby. I was a baby falling through these buildings. And it was such an overwhelming experience. I had to stop him. I said, look, I'm sorry. I'm having an experience, and it's overwhelming to me. And I'm imagining it has some meaning to you. So I'm going to bring it up. And I told him what I've been experiencing. And he became enraged with me and stormed out of the room. You and your psychobabble, you think you know everything. And he left. And he came back the next day and he said, how did you know? How did you know? In my head, there's a screaming baby all the time. It's falling, the baby, the baby, the baby. And I said, it's something you put in me. It's your experience. It's a part of yourself that is disconnected from your conscious present self, but it communicated with me. And it was deeply meaningful to him to have that part of himself brought into the room and create the possibility now of him integrating that with the rest of his body, essentially. So that's the kind of magic that happens with the autonomic nervous system and this socio-emotional exchange system.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. I mean, and by the way, Doctor, John is like one of those Gary Brecka type guys. And I had the fortune of sitting at not just one, but two different dinner tables with Dr. Drew and Gary Brecka. And when those two started to mind meld, if you think what he just said now was a lot of big words, you should have been there for those dinners, because it was pretty incredible. And I think I picked up about 67.5% of what you guys were saying. Pretty powerful stuff. But I love you like a brother, Dr. Drew. I know we've only known each other for a brief period of time, but I just appreciate the hell out of you. I feel like I've grown up with you. So in many respects, I lost my father at a all too early age. I mean, I was in my 30s, but it's never soon enough, to lose a parent. And so, having those steady voices over the airwaves over the years, and even when I was in my 20s, and just doing dumb stuff, and always having those conversations that I could fall asleep to at night, and may my wife still fall asleep to you and Adam almost every night of the week. So I appreciate you, love you, and appreciate you jumping on today. And we're gonna go ahead and sign off. We've been at it for now 90 minutes, but I want to do this, Dr. Drew. We always try and capture some quotable from the guest and kind of produce after the show some materials. What's a quote that you've been kind of toying around with, something that you just want to kind of blurt out to the world? Like what's a quote and quotable we can leave with?
I'm not sure I can condense it to an aphorism, but I've been thinking a lot lately, and I didn't get into this topic. I brushed past it, but I feel like that the predominant, what Abraham Lincoln used to call the American mind, has become obsessed with messianic fantasies about saving the world. And those, Piaget identified late adolescence as the messianic stage of development. And it's normal, but it's pathological to stay there after age 17. And that the reality is we need to come to terms with the fact that real meaning comes from service to one person at a time, having a skill, having a set of knowledge, wisdom, and using that to help one person. That is what nourishes people. No one person has ever saved the world. Even Jesus was dead for 300 years before he became meaningful. You don't get to save the world, but you can save people one at a time and make a huge difference in people's lives.
That's it right there. Well, you're doing that every day, Dr. Drew.
I've got one for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Only Dr. Drew could have a carpenter from New York sitting and spending hours at a time studying the parasympathetic nervous system.
There you go, folks. Well, and I mean, we should almost rename this show like Brain Studies Club or something, because we seem to always fall into this realm. But I'm fascinated to no end by this stuff, Dr. Drew. I could talk to you all day long, and I know you could too. So thanks, everybody. We're going to go ahead and wrap for today, but Dr. Drew, take us home.
Well, appreciate you guys. I'll be on again on Clubhouse taking calls for a streaming show. I believe it's 5 p.m. Pacific time, but I'm going to put up an announcement in a couple of minutes. So we'd love to see you guys over there as well. And it's a whole different topic. I'm talking to another Facebook whistleblower about the impact of social media.
Boom. Well, you are on the cutting edge, my friend, and I appreciate you. And we'll go ahead and wrap. Closers Club out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Adios, BC. Thank you.